Okay, if we're all good to go, I guess we'll start. Let me just start my old timer here. Hi, I'm Kevin Forbes. I'm a developer at Klei Entertainment, and this is Don't Starve, Building an Antisocial Game. This talk is kind of a design postmortem and production overview for the game. We built this game a lot differently than we had built any of our previous games, and we learned a lot, at least as a studio, and thought it might be interesting to share what we found building a game this way with y'all. I'm a programmer by training, gameplay programmer specifically. This is not a programming talk. It's kind of very designy and almost production-y, which is a bit scary. But if you have any technical questions at all about the game, just ask me afterwards, and I'll try my best to answer them. Cool. So just a quick show of hands here. Who's all played Don't Starve? Awesome. Anyone played on Chrome? Old school. All right. If you haven't played Don't Starve, well, what's the marketing speak for it? It's an uncompromising wilderness survival game full of science and magic. When asked about it, I usually describe it as kind of a survival horror crafting death simulator. You play as this little scientist guy named Wilson, who's been trapped in this mysterious wilderness, and he doesn't really know why he's there. It's got something to do with hubris. And you have to guide him to explore his world and eventually exploit it and try to escape. Although, spoiler alert, you can't actually. I'm sorry if I ruined the game for anybody. Yeah, so it's basically you walk around, you pick things up, you build things out of the other things, and you avoid getting your face eaten. So Don't Starve actually started as a game jam. At Klei, we do game jams every year, just before we leave for Christmas break. It's a great thing, by the way, that you can do at your studio. It's great for morale and just gets that creative juice kind of flowing. Don't Starve actually came out of our inaugural game jam, I think in late 2010. Myself and another programmer at Klei, Julian Kwan, threw together this, I guess you could call it a game. It's like this little pie game thing with stolen art from the internet because we were just programming. And you basically play a 16-bit Link, and you have a fire that kind of comes and goes. And there's a day-night cycle. And the goal of it is to survive as long as you can. Your health, I think your health and your hunger were the same thing, and it was always going down. And these pig creatures show up, like at the periphery of your camp every night. And they're kind of shy at the begin with, but once there's enough of them, because more keep coming every night, they start to kind of crowd your space and rub into you, and your health starts to go down. And the only way to get health back is to pick up the Castlevania axe that's off in the shadows there, and then run after them and turn them into meat and eat them. So it took 2 days. Most of that time was spent trying to get Pi game to work. I think there was a weird bug with OpenGL at the time, which has since been fixed. But yeah, it was fun. It wasn't much, though, and we didn't do anything with it for the longest time because we were busy. Both Julian and I were working on Shank II. Shank II is a sequel to Shank. Surprise. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up game. You play as a very violent gentleman who's running from left to right and shanking people. I didn't design that one. But it's a large game, I guess, is kind of the takeaway. It's a linear narrative, heavily content-heavy thing. You run by a lot of really beautiful art that you only ever see once. And it's quite expensive to make a game this way. We're not a huge company. I think we're currently at like 30 or 40 people at most, and we're at our peak, I think, right now. But like, you know, this took dozens of people a year and a half to make. So we needed to get publisher support to kind of get this thing off the ground. And you know, you always see a little bit of creative control with that. And there's all sorts of crazy deadlines that come in, and crunch happens, and all that kind of crap that we're all used to. But Shank II, at the time of the jam, I think we're halfway done. And then by the end of 2011, beginning of 2012, it was wrapping up. We had another project going on at the time, Mark of the Ninja, which is a much better game. Unfortunately, I didn't work on that one. But most of the studio was working on that. People would transition off Shank and go to Ninja as needed, but they didn't need more programmers, really. It was kind of set. It was using the same engine and everything. So there was a bit of extra capacity there that the studio had. And we decided that we would run a little experiment. Because we'd always been making these, like, really, for us, you must laugh if you're from, like, EA or something. I'm like, yeah, it's really expensive. It's like $1 million. But, you know, we've been making these, like, for us, expensive games. We wanted to see if we could create something very cheap. Something so cheap and so quick to create that we could self-publish it and have, like, full control and be, you know, masters of our own destiny and that kind of thing. So the plan was to take a very small team. We're talking like 4 people or so. Build a game as quickly as possible, get it to a minimally viable state, and put it online and let people play it. Like, I mean, usually people didn't play Shank II until, you know, 8, 9 months into development when, you know, we really knew what it was, and it was a sequel anyway, so you kind of knew what it was to begin with. But yeah, we were going to just get something out there, see if people like it, see what kind of sticks when you throw stuff out the wall, and then start to iterate. I mean, this is free-to-play was kind of coming on the scene at this time, at least in North America, and a lot of ideas like analytics were kind of new, or at least new to us at the time. So we were thinking, well, maybe we can use analytics, maybe we can use all this new technology and all these, like, new distribution platforms that let you publish and update a game, even if you're just like a small little stupid company in Vancouver, Canada. And can we actually grow that into something bigger? So that's what we did. We took 4 people, 3 programmers and 1 artist, and again, some support staff like our sound guys on every game, that kind of thing. And we started looking for an IP to actually create. And when we racked our brains, and we actually decided that little game jam that we did about a year previous would be a good candidate to make this game. And then also, as kind of the singular design constraint for the game, we wanted to make it free to play. You know, this was, if you'd been to GDC around that time, if you talked to anybody in the industry, we were all scared, right? Because, like, you know, our lunch was getting eaten by these free-to-play upstart people. And it seemed as though it would be good for us to at least try, see what that design space is like. You know, it was kind of a hard sell with some of the team, especially me. But you know, given the option of, like, can you create your own game? By the way, it has to be free to play. We're like, oh, okay, sure, we'll give it a shot. Klei had actually had a little bit of experience with this in the past. We had created a kind of a. This was happening right when I joined the company in 2008, but it was like a Smash Brothers kind of online thing for Nexon that. Called Sugar Rush, that probably no one's ever heard of. But it was kind of fun, but for business reasons, it didn't ever get off the ground. Anyways, so there we are. We want to take that little game jam and make it free to play and get it online as quick as possible and see what we can get. So looking at the game jam and working with our art director, we came up with this concept art for Don't Starve. And I mean, if you played the game, this is not what Don't Starve looks like at all. This is, you know, it's kind of like happy colors and lots of round characters. This guy kind of looks like Barney Rubble. Nothing is too threatening. Like, the pig creature looks kind of weird, but he's just going to slobber on you or something if he catches you. So, you know, it's for lack of a better term, it's a bit bland, right? Like, it was made. This is us trying to appeal to a casual audience. And really acting outside of our wheelhouse. Because, you know, at the time, we were starting to play all these games and kind of see what these things are like. And this is, I guess, our impression of it at the time. So working from this art and those design constraints, our original design document, was it a document? Yeah, it was a document. We don't write a lot of documents, but there was one for this. Our original design is something I now call Mayor of Pigtown. So in Mayor of Pigtown, the game was kind of split into two arenas. You had your persistent online base building end. This is where you would spend most of your time. You would kind of wander around, and there was the pig creatures were there, and they were kind of your citizens. And if you did well, you would get more of them. If you didn't do as well, they would kind of leave, but it wouldn't be that bad, right? And, you know, you'd share this with your friends, and you'd buy, like, truffles with real money and give those to the pigs, or I don't know, stuff like that. In addition to that, we had this idea of having adventure runs. And in an adventure run, what you would do is you would leave the pig village, and you would go out into the wilderness. And you would go on an adventure, and you would probably, you know, explore an ancient ruins or you know, kill some beefalo or something rather. Do something exciting to gain a resource, to bring it back to your base, to make your base better. And of course, that was going to be stamina limited because it was 2012. So, you know, that was our idea for the design, and we set about to implementation. We were writing this for an online distribution platform at the time. We were using Chrome native client. Really cool technology. Lets you run a game at like near native speeds with OpenGL rendering in a browser. So exactly what we were looking for because we didn't want to learn too much. And we wanted to be able to update this thing like on the fly, like every day if it came to it, to make the game better for the players who were playing it. So 3 programmers, 1 artist. We set out. Engine was mostly from scratch, mostly in C++. I mean, we stole some ideas and concepts and even code from the Shank and Ninja engines as needed. But again, this was, in our minds at least, destined for a much more casual audience. So the min spec was going to be a lot lower. So we did make things a little cheaper here and there, and a little. We optimized not for like super fidelity graphics, but more for like, you know, it'll run on anything. Most of the gameplay code is written in Lua. That was kind of new to us. We'd used it as a data definition language before, but I'd heard good things. So we set out making a mountain of Lua code. It took us a while to kind of tame that mountain. I'm really happy with it now, and it's great for modding and that kind of thing. But at the time, it was a bit of a source of bugs. Yeah, so we started implementing, and after I'd say about a month, we had little characters walking around on screen in kind of a world that, you know, wasn't just a blank screen. No gameplay yet. It was mostly just character, keyboard interaction stuff. And onto this, we wanted to start prototyping the actual gameplay. Well, Mayor of Pigtown, the town wasn't all that interesting to us, and it needed like a lot of HUD elements and that kind of thing. We didn't have a system for that yet. So we decided that, you know, the game, the real fun, the really selling point of this game was probably going to be those adventure runs. So we might as well start there. Don't Starve is a very systems-driven game. Lots of very simple things are happening in the environment. Lots of very easy to understand and easy to implement little loops are going on all the time. And in and of themselves, they're not that interesting. It's like a tree grows. Congratulations. But if you put enough of those things in the same system and allow a player to kind of run rampant through it and try to figure out things and use the affordances, you know, given by, I know what an axe is and that's a tree, I guess I should chop it down. The idea was that immersion gameplay would happen. Interesting stuff would be found by the player, and that would be enough to keep them engaged and keep them playing and make them buy truffles for their pig villages or something or other. As an initial test run of this idea, we wanted to create a loop where the player would craft a trap, use it to trap a rabbit, capture the rabbit, cook it, and eat it to make their hunger go up, it being a survival game and all. And this is what that looks like in Don't Starve. So, you know, you collect some stuff in the environment, you craft it. The fact that you got that far tells us that, you know, you figured out the crafting menu. You've probably used the crafting menu to see what you need to pick up in order to make a particular thing. You find a rabbit hole. A rabbit is probably milling about it. You've maybe tried to catch it with your hands and chased it away, so you know, oh, there's something more to this. So, you know, you put 1 and 2 together, you put the trap down, rabbit doesn't go for it. Then you notice, oh, I have a carrot in my inventory because I obsessively pick things up because it's a video game. And then you take the carrot and you bait the trap, and the rabbit falls for it. And you get a rabbit in your inventory, and you can murder it by right-clicking on its slot. And then it gives you meat, and you're like, wow, this is great. I can eat the meat, but the meat's raw, and it actually kind of hurts you a little bit when you eat it. So, I mean, you can do that if you have some other way to heal yourself. But you've probably been picking other things up, too. So, you know, you make an axe. You've played Minecraft, so you chop down a tree, and you get wood, and you make a fire because we kill you at night if you don't. And there's more on that later. And then, you know, by hovering the meat over or hovering many different objects actually over that fire, you might notice that there's a cook option. And then, you know, a little spark goes off, and you're like, wow, this game's so deep. I can cook meat and eat it. And then you eat it, and a little dopamine hit goes off, and you're well on your way to becoming a Don't Starve fan. So that's the low-level stuff, and we actually found that worked. Like, we were not public yet. with everything. But we were bringing people in from Craigslist. Like we just put an advertise like, hey kids, would you like to play a video game that kind of sucks? And then they would come in and we'd pay them something, and then they'd play the game, and we would watch them and then interview them afterwards. And you know, it took a couple of weeks of iteration and UI changes and you know, just changing the way the environment was actually structured. But people were getting it, and when they got it, they really liked it. So it was like, oh, we're onto something here. That's cool. So this is this is a kind of a slide about the high-level gameplay. So I mentioned before that you would go on adventure runs. Well, what's the point, right? Like, you know, you need some kind of a goal for this thing to work. So we actually, you know, given that we were coming from the perspective of people who make these linear narrative experiences with lots of set pieces and explosions and things, we set about making a level editor. I called it Feast. I called the engine Famine. I really wanted that to be a thing, but no one followed my lead on it, so it didn't take off. But yeah, so we built this in-game editor. It looked like a really bad version of Unity. Like you could place things, entities, and you could tweak their component properties and whatever. And you know, actually, I built this big level full of trees, and I'm really proud of myself. And the initial scenario that we wanted to get by was that, oh, it was really lame. What was it? You started in this really easy area, and then you would, you know, figure out the controls of the game. And then you would walk over, and there was a hard area. It was full of like these carnivorous spiders that you really didn't want to be near by yourself because you're really weak and don't starve. So you'd run away from that, and you'd find a pig village that was just kind of there by itself. And you could befriend the pigs, and then they would help you fight. And there was a pig king. And the pig king is like the stereotypical like RPG quest giver. And he'd say, oh, I have a spider problem. You should kill those guys. And then I'll give you a key, and then you can continue. So again, you know, all the real game designers were busy with Mark of the Ninja. So we'd played some RPGs. So we said, yeah, let's make that, sure. It took about a week. We got it in. There was some tech that had to get built for it, but you know, it was terrible. It was really boring, and people didn't get it. And it turns out there's actually a lot going on with level design. Oh, who'd have thought? So you know, it was failing on two accounts. One, it took way longer than 10 to 15 minutes to play this thing. Like people would, you know, take an hour, and it was really drawn out. And you know, maybe we could have got that down with tuning and all that. But two, on a production level, it just could not stand. Like the original design called for like lots of these things. That was what we were going to be monetizing, right? Like here's all these adventures you can go on, and you only get to do 3 a day unless you pay us. And so we would need to crank these things out, and it took us a week to do a crappy one. So you know, 2, 3 to make a nice one once we kind of get good at it. So it just wasn't going to happen. So we went back to the drawing board and found inspiration in like the roguelikes that we were playing when we weren't thinking about free-to-play, and made the levels procedurally generated. I don't know a ton of the technical details because I didn't actually work on the system. One of our programmers, Alia McCutcheon, really took that system and ran to town with it. It's like his area of interest. But the gist of it is that like the version on the left is the first one. We actually shipped with this in the early days. And the circles are, this is like a really zoomed out map, right? The circles are narrative nodes, I suppose. Like they're semi-handcrafted in that like it says like this is what the biome is going to be. These are the kind of things we're going to spawn there. Like there's some with like lots of spiders and some with lots of trees and some with a pig village, and little algorithms would kind of place things down nicely within those. And these narrative nodes would be arranged into these chains, and the chain would tell a simple little story, like, you know, like you craft an axe, and then you go to the spider lair, and you kill a spider, and then you go to the pig king, and, you know, there was a couple of these things, and they're very loose, very suggestive things. They weren't like, this is what happened to Wilson when he went to Wilson Land. It's very much, this is something that you could do, and if you do something completely different on the nodes, that's cool too. But the important thing is that it gives a sense of place. It seems like you're going from place to place, and the world around you is changing and has a logical reason to exist. So that seemed to work pretty well, actually. Like people were having more fun in that than in our handcrafted level. In the final version of the game that we actually shipped, it looks more like on the right. Something Voronoi diagram, something makes that work. But the general principles are really all the same. Ali is at the booth, at the IGF booth, if you want to talk to him. I'm sure he'd love to tell you details. So we had our low-level structure in place. We had our high-level structure in place. And as I said, we were doing play tests with people that we'd bring in. And we didn't really want to make a lot of tutorials for the game because tutorials suck. they're hard to make, right? Like, you got to make all this throwaway code that kind of has weird hooks into every little system and is able to pause things and like put up kind of UI text at inopportune moments and stuff like that. So we didn't have any of those systems built out yet. So we're like, oh, okay, we'll just make it so that they can figure it out themselves. And in order to kind of emphasize the point, and because we were playing those roguelikes that I mentioned before, on a whim, we just threw in Permadeath. And to this day, like, it's really polarizing in the Don't Starve community, right? Like, you either really like it and you kind of get it, or you're like, this game is just, what are they doing? and I empathize with that because, you know, on the face of it, it shouldn't work. It's a game where you spend like hours and hours and hours crafting this environment and bending it to your will, and you got this awesome base, and then some spider just like surprises you and you die, and it's game over. Ha. I mean, I am a bit of a misanthrope, especially with respect to the games that I make, so I think it's awesome. But, you know, not everybody agrees. And there's always a mod system. There are lots of mods on Steam Workshop that you can use to kind of allow that experience to be a little more forgiving. And even ways in the game you can build these kind of save points, but it takes resources and know-how in order to do so. But yeah, I mean, I think what it did is it kind of gave Don't Starve two things. One, it gave it an identity. Like, it's that game that kills your base. Like, you know, something that someone's going to tell someone about when they're talking about games. It's something that kind of makes it stand out. And B, it really emphasized that learning. Like, there was the carrot of the dopamine hit when you actually, you know, figure out how to craft something and you finish one of those kind of intention loops that we created. And that's really cool and all. And then there was the stick of like, oh, you forgot to make a fire, bonk, dead. So it was working towards two ends. I think this 1 million dead Wilsons early in production, we were counting, right, because we were using analytics, and we hit 1 million, and we made a big deal out of it, so special art. So that was kind of happening on the design and programming front. The art side was busy as well. So this is kind of the evolution of Wilson. We go from, you know, casual, friendly Barney Rubble on the left here, and then it's just, I don't know if they were being influenced by the meaner mechanics and the more desperate tone of the game that was starting to seep in from the mechanics side, or if we were watching their art and shifting to match that as well. But there was this great like kind of confluence where we decided the game became less and less what we thought other people actually wanted, and more something that we thought fit as a gestalt, designer word. So you can see, like, he becomes kind of black and white. It's sketchier. I mean, there's production reasons for that. It makes it easier to bang out costumes and animations for him. But also, like, it just kind of gives you this certain tone, this certain ambiance, a certain sense of desperation that you know the player is experiencing as they play this game, given its mechanics. And then you also are able to kind of like project onto the player avatar itself, and it's like it just kind of all comes together, right? So after 2 months, this is what our prototype looked like. If you played Don't Starve, it'll look pretty familiar. I mean, the entire UI got thrown out like 4 or 5 times, like that always happens on every game ever. And I think the Wilson art isn't quite final in this particular screenshot, but the basic loops of the game were there. It was missing a ton of content, but there was enough to kind of keep you busy. The biggest difference between this version of Don't Starve and the shipped version is that goal text at the top. Given that we had just kind of excised all the high-level goal stuff in favor of this really loosey-goosey kind of procedurally generated narrative node chain thing, we figured, well, players are still probably going to need a little bit of hand-holding and something to guide them through the experience if they don't try to do something stupid and get themselves killed and decide that the game's not for them too early. So this is what we came up with. It was kind of like achievements almost, in that they were really simple tasks, and it was kind of, there was an escalation of these tasks as you would play. So it's like, the first one would be like, hey, craft an axe, that'd be cool. And then go kill a pig man and feed the meat to his buddy and make him your friend. Leading up to like these kind of like gauntlet marathon things, like survive X number of nights. And the idea with that, at least we were thinking, was that if you can survive that time after we've taught you all the mechanics, then you've learned how to play the game, and then you're going to go off and explore the game and kind of take it as it is. It worked and it didn't. I mean, I think it didn't work because it worked too well. With the people that we were bringing in to play the game, they would follow all the goals, and they would learn. They would get everything that we put out in front of them. It's like, oh, this is really working. But then, of course, we haven't made very many of these things yet, so we would run out at a certain point, after a half hour, 40 minutes or so. And then they would be playing, and then the goal text would disappear, or it would say, like, hey, you're on your own now. And they would turn to us and say, like, well, what do I do now? We're like, well, it's open world. Go craft something or whatever. You should want to do something. And they didn't. They had optimized for boredom, really, right? Like, survive 4 nights. What they would do is they would build their fire, collect enough, like, vegetables to kind of fill their pockets, and then just stand there eating, feed the fire, feed themselves, feed the fire. And they do that for, like, 4 nights of 8-hour days, right? Very boring, but they were winning the game as we had presented it. So after a lot of discussion, we actually took these goals out. We wrote a paper about this, actually, and submitted it, and it was in the Penny Arcade report, which sadly is no longer with us. I think if you Google around for "Don't Starve," intrinsic motivation, there's a big write-up on our thoughts while we were doing all of this, what that actually meant. I think people have archived it, so you can find it there. So that's what we had at 2 months. It was fun. We were enjoying it. People were enjoying it. They wanted to play more. The problem was it was nothing like what we had set out to do, right? Like, half the game wasn't there. There was no persistent village. Monetization was just not going to work, right? We built this game about, like, bare white-knuckle kind of scarcity and just hanging on. And the thought of, like, actually allowing people to pay for, like, a bucket of meat or something to allow them to live a little longer just flew in the face of the entire design. So we had a bit of soul-searching to do. Lots and lots of these really long kind of team-building meetings where we would kind of hash out ideas and blame each other. And eventually, we decided to give it one more go. This slide is not really meant for legibility. It's more just the impression. But this was our free-to-play loop version 2. And the idea was that we would take the game as it was and then think, okay, well, how can we monetize this as we understand free-to-play and not kind of subvert the central meaning of the game where it tries to tell you that life is meaningless and finite. And what we came up with was that it would all be one world. There was no kind of like two-world thing, no stamina-based instance runs or anything. You would just be dropped off in the wilderness, and you would build your base, or not, depending on what you wanted to do. And every so often, we'd have this little call to action, some kind of clue in the environment. It would send you off on a quest. And it was a very simple quest. It was like, kill that big thing over there, or whatever. But we wouldn't actually say, kill that big thing over there. It would just be, there'd be a big thing, and you should kill it, because it's a video game. So we would do that kind of thing, and then you would go out. You would gather materials, defeat the ruins, kill the deer clops, whatever. Bring stuff back to your base, improve your base. And then you probably want to show it off. So like, they would still have all those kind of like social hooks where you could show your base to people and that kind of thing. But then all of the actual monetization was going to come into aesthetics and options. So with that procedural world generation that we were experimenting with, there was a lot of knobs and dials that you could turn. And you could put in new content and get new biome types and new rules for placing biomes and new monsters. So we figured, oh, well, we can sell sets of that. We can if you like the game and you want a little more fine-grained control over your experience, give us $1 or $2, and then you have full access to customizing your world. That doesn't really compromise the design. That's fine. It's kind of like a shareware demo. And then we were going to sell hats because yeah. And finally, we were also going to sell something else that I've forgotten. But anyways, the idea is that we were trying to find ways to build the game, adapt this free-to-play mindset to the game without compromising the core design. In the end, we decided not to do that. I think it would have worked after a fashion. But it actually came down to a couple of reasons. Primary to me was that we were going to be monetizing the game's economy. Albeit indirectly through this world generation stuff and more content. We're going to sell you DLC packs and stuff like that. But because we were monetizing that stuff, it had to really work and be non-exploitable. If people could find a way to get an infinite meat fountain or something like that, then we'd have to patch that because the economy is broken and monetization will shut down. And we're a small team. We're like 3 programmers who barely know what the web is. And the thought of getting a call at 2 in the morning saying, oh, you have to come in and fix it because the company stopped making money, is a great motivator to make you not put yourself into those design corners. So it was making us very conservative in our designs. Like, we weren't going to add a lot to the game. We weren't going to take very many risks because it had to be so defensively coded. And if for a game like Don't Starve, where it's like this open world kind of rollicking, like watch what crazy things can happen with emergent gameplay, that's kind of death. Like you can't really make that happen. You lose the soul of the game. And then also, like, kind of very related to that, just quality of life wise. Like, we're a small programming team, and our background is mostly in like console games, right? We're used to like the finish everything, ship it, a little bit overtime to get that to happen, and then back to normal. The thought of being always on call just did not appeal to us. It was too hard of a sell for the programming team for too little benefit. I mean, given that we thought it was going to compromise the game anyway. So in the end, we decided just to roll with what we had. The game became the Antisocial game. And we wrote a document for like the first time, codifying our 4 pillars. And the 4 pillars were going to be dark humor. The game was going to have this kind of morbid tone. It was pretty foreboding, but it was winking at you at the same time. And, influenced by like those classic LucasArts games, like that kind of thing, where the character would like turns to the screen, flaps his gums, and says something funny about the background. That seemed like a good way in order to make the game appealing to people on a surface level. Number 2, constant scarcity. The game is not about overcoming the environment. The game is not about becoming powerful and having this kind of power fantasy. Like we just made Shank II, right? Like, there's a cutscene where Shank like dives into the ocean and rips a shark in half, and I think throws it at a helicopter and it explodes. So we'd had enough of that. I really wanted to explore other design areas. So like, what happens if you make a game where the character is really weak? What kind of feelings and emotions can you make in a game where the goal is not to overcome everything? And if you try to do that, you're probably gonna fail. So that was very interesting to us. Number 3, player discovery. So this is really just a codification of like the findings that we'd had with the goal experience and with that whole kind of emergent small chain of events thing that we were doing with people from Craigslist at the time. And then finally, mysteries. I think this is really important in games. I mean, we all play these big, I call them like spectacle shooters, where the game it's a third-person action game, usually. And you go from like level to level to level, and crazy stuff happens, like you're climbing these buildings, and the buildings are falling down, and you're beating people up as you do it, or whatever, because it's always violence, right? But the idea is that it's very linear. You see all this content. It's like playing a Michael Bay movie, right? And I didn't want to do that. We didn't have the money to do that. Like, we really just couldn't afford that. So when you build a game like that, you make sure that everybody sees all the content, because, how much does it cost to make that building fall down? How much does that cutscene cost? It's all very expensive. You have to justify this stuff. So the idea with the mysteries was we were going to make the game seem a lot bigger than it was by not letting you see everything. In a single playthrough of Don't Starve, you're going to only see like, 50% of the content, 20% of the content. There's an entire like semi-handcrafted sort of narrative endgame called adventure mode that we don't even tell you about. You have to find it. It's hard to find. And once you find it, like, then you can go through this kind of portal, and it takes you from like world to world, and at the end you get to confront the big bad of the Don't Starve universe. But yeah, like, most people don't even know it's there. So when you do find out it's there, it's really cool. And you're likely to tell your friend, like, hey, did you know there's like this whole other game in there? And that worked really well. It made people talk to each other about Don't Starve. And that was our primary way of that was how we were going to market this thing, was to try to get people to kind of word of mouth it, right? Unfortunately, like, reviewers didn't find it. Whatever. So this is our production timeline. Details, I guess. But the gist of it is that it was going to be a slow rollout, kind of a staged, increasing audience thing. So we spent a couple of months making a prototype, and then, after that, we stealth-launched it on Chrome Web Store. We didn't really market it. We maybe tweeted once or twice just to get kind of an initial seed group of people. But we didn't actually want a lot of people playing the game at that point. The game sucked. There was like nothing there. But we wanted people to start, to self-select that, yeah, I'll play this kind of broken half there game because it's interesting to me to see how this is going to develop. And And we wanted to start to get feedback so that we could improve it, so that it would stop sucking eventually. We also wanted to see what kind of graphics cards people had, because that's really hard on PC. And we hadn't really focused on a PC development before. We'd consoles, right? So that was eye-opening. After a couple of months of that, the game had improved. We'd made the game a lot bigger. We'd stabilized it on a lot of systems. We started charging for it on Chrome Store. The game was starting to make money. And that changes the conversation with people. Like, before it was like, hey, check out this game. It's really cool. You should play it. Thanks. To, hey, give us like $8 or something to get 2 copies of it to share with your friend. And the fact that the mere like act of taking money for the game changed the relationship we had with our players. All of a sudden, they weren't like just our buddies helping us make this game. They were our customers, and we were beholden to their requests. If stuff stopped working, that was a problem. Thankfully, stuff mostly worked because we had worked out all the major issues, like with the free audience. After a couple more months of that, we went on Steam. And Steam is, if you're making a PC game, that's kind of where the audience is right now. And the idea there was that the game was systematically pretty complete. Like, we knew what the game was. We just had to make a lot more content for it. So let's pre-sell it on Steam. This is before the days of kind of the structured early access program there. So we would pre-sell it there, and then if you did a pre-order, you would get a key. You could play the game. And a bit of education there to kind of understand, so people understood that they weren't actually getting a final game. And I think early access still has that problem in a lot of cases, if you read the forums on Steam. But it definitely worked. Like it definitely brought our audience up slowly over time and allowed us to react to their feedback, their kind of expanding pool of feedback. And then finally, we launched about a year and maybe a year and a half after we started. And we actually delayed our launch by a month in order to work on that adventure mode that I mentioned previously. And we did that without any overtime, because we were already in the black, because we were selling our game. It was selling on Steam already, and we're a very small team, so we don't need to sell that many copies to break even. So we didn't have a publisher breathing down our neck. We were able to say, well, it's best for the game if we delay for a month. We can talk to our community. They're very reasonable people. And they can play the game already, so it doesn't really matter to them whether it's final or not. It's kind of a label at that point. So we made the decision then to extend for a month, and it was very, very undramatic. As I said, we were starting to deal with these increasing waves of Don't Starve players. And we had a couple different ways to talk to them. There was kind of the standard broadcasting stuff, so the servers are down or there's a new update coming, that kind of thing. We'd go out on Twitter or MailChimp. Feedback-wise, we were using Google Analytics in the early days. It allowed us to get an analytics system up and running very quickly. Didn't scale super well. It's not really meant for games. It's for websites. So we eventually replaced it with a custom solution, which took quite a while to make, but is very useful for our subsequent games. And then finally, Olark was, in the very early Chrome days, it was this really cool plugin for the browser, and it would let us talk to people in real time as they were playing the game. And I mean, we had all been working at previously in big AAA companies, and even within Klei, you were secretive about your game, and you never actually talked to the players. But all of a sudden, we were having these online, real-time conversations with people as they were discovering new content in Don't Starve. It's like, oh, well, what do you think of that? Or why isn't your video card working? And it was very eye-opening. Of course, it wasn't scalable. Once we were a couple of months in, it was just there was too many people playing, and you couldn't really address their concerns adequately, so we turned it off. But given that the majority of our conversations about the game with our community actually happen on our forums, we host these forums, and the devs were actually very active in there. So I was in there every day talking to people and kind of explaining what we were doing and teasing them about with upcoming content and soliciting their feedback, and then actually acting upon their feedback where it made sense, or saying why we weren't going to if it wasn't going to make sense. It was really it took a lot of training in order to get this to work. We have a really kick-ass community team at Klei, which kind of took me aside once or twice, don't tell them that. That's not how you communicate with a group. They'll tear you apart if you anger them that way. And just ways to keep things positive. That's the most important thing about an online community that you want to build around a game. You have to make it a welcoming space. People can't be yelled at for making a suggestion that you don't like. The community can't bully each other. You have to have a zero-tolerance policy for that kind of stuff. And then also yourself as a developer, you need to set the example. You cannot kind of be snarky, and you can't get into these little petty debates with people. You need to rise above all that because people will sense that tone and start to follow it. Related to that, there's no real good way to visualize this, so I just got a picture of a road. We found that we knew where the game was going. We had kind of a clear vision of what the design was going to be and how the game would get harder over time, because we were marketing it as like this hardcore, uncompromising wilderness survival game. It was actually pretty easy in the early days because a lot of stuff was missing. There was no winter. There was no, the hounds weren't there yet. There was no sanity mechanic. So we actually, we had to explain to people very clearly that, yes, we know that these things in the game aren't complete yet. These things are kind of broken. This is how we're going to address them. This is the order, approximately, that we're going to address them in. And this is why we're doing it. So we actually crafted this document. That's kind of a pull quote from it, and the major points are in the bullets there. It was kind of like, this is what the game will look like at launch, and this is how we're going to get to it. And we would refer to this in all of our communications. Like when we had an update, where it's like, okay, we put in winter, as we said we were going to do in the roadmap link. And eventually the community really took it to heart, and it really shaped the discussions that we would have with them. They really held it to us, right? Like, if you're going to say you're going to do something online in writing, like, you better do it, right? Or have a very good reason that you can explain, and a very good relationship with your community such that they'll accept the explanation if you decide you can't do it. So yeah, little design aside, the overlapping threat model of Don't Starve was kind of the major thing that we were trying to get across in that roadmap. So in Don't Starve, like, very simple systems interact to make the game feel bigger than it is. So like day and night, in and of itself, not that exciting. But then you add winter and summer, so you have like kind of 4 states that you can be in then. And then you add like weather, so like, that multiplies it further. And then you add this kind of transient insanity thing. So like, you can be insane and wet in summer at night. And that's very different from other states that you can be in the game. And things are very loosely bound together. So like, it's not like in Shank where like we had a grapple animation for every combination of player character, weapon, and goon. When Deerclops, the guy with the one eye on the right of the diagram there, when he attacks anything, he just kind of raises up and bam. And it's a nice animation, right? But it's the only one he has. And there's a reason for that, because we can use him in all sorts of different ways. And the world is internally consistent. Like, we kind of set this consistent visual quality bar, mostly writing on the style, such that we didn't need to be very detailed about everything. And it allowed us to kind of keep up that mystery approach where it seems like there's a lot more of the game going on there because there's stuff that even we haven't seen because we don't know how the Deerclops and like the bees are going to interact until we actually see it happen. So that emergent stuff, where like surprising things can happen, like what happens when you see a Deerclops at night and he kills your fire, things like that, coupled with our marketing plan of like, we were really focusing upon retention. Like, we were using our analytics to try to get people to play longer and longer, not because we wanted to monetize them and not because, they were going to hit some paywall or something, but because we thought that they would tell their friends eventually, or their friends would notice that they haven't seen them in a while, and it's like, oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'm playing Don't Starve. So we were trying to kind of foster this word-of-mouth marketing scheme. And luckily enough, at the same time, Let's Plays happened and Twitch happened. And we didn't know this was happening until we saw the results in our sales graphs. So this is like the unit list sales graph that everyone shows at GDC. This is from kind of commercial launch to actual launch, I think. That first red spike there, right, which is like blew us away at the time, that's Total Biscuit. He did a WTF for Don't Starve in the very early days. And we didn't know about it until we saw the sales. We're like, what on earth is happening? You Google around, and it's like, oh, who's this guy? That's really cool. And, so that kind of, it would have a ratcheting effect upon our numbers. We'd see all of a sudden this influx of players, influx of sales, and it would really help us out. When it gets kind of orange and green, that's Steam coming into effect, so just a larger market. But that giant spike there, the one on the left, that's not launch. That's the Yogscast. I didn't know about the Yogscast. And then all of a sudden, we were on like the front page of Steam in the top 10 sellers, and it was like, what on earth is happening? These streamers, like, you really, I think there was a lot of luck involved. We made a game with all this kind of cool emergent stuff that could happen, and that people wanted to show off, and that had these mysteries so that everyone's experience was a little bit different. At the same time, when people were looking for that precise type of game to show off their stream. So just insanely lucky on our part there. I don't know how reproducible that is, because there's a lot of games out there and there's a lot of streamers, but worth a shot. The second spike there, that's launch. That's kind of the standard launch spike. So given that we were kind of interacting with these streamers and these updates started to become a big deal, like people knew what was coming and we would kind of say, oh, well, winter's going to come eventually. Winter's coming. We saw a lot of GIFs on the forum about that. We decided that, let's try doing a little low impact marketing on this thing. So we actually started to make these posters. And these posters would be like once for every update. We were updating like clockwork on every other Tuesday. That's when the build would go live. Or we'd try to put it live in the morning and then would fail and fail and fail. And eventually we'd go live at like 5 o'clock at night. And people would play it. But, the game was still very small at this point. And after an update, the players would come in, they'd consume all the content, see all the new stuff, and they're like, yeah, that was really cool. And now what, right? Because, it really wasn't complete, and there wasn't enough to play to tide you over the next 2 weeks. We started adding these posters, and there was videos where we would kind of give you previews of what was going to happen. We started to put like little puzzles and ARG type stuff in those videos. And we did this in order to make the community have something constructive to talk about between those updates. So the game kind of had this internal clock during this phase. Like it'd be like, we launch, people consume the new content, they talk about it, they try to find all the stuff we didn't tell them about, they added everything to the wiki and that kind of stuff. And then, they play, and then that weekend it would kind of spike again as the people who can't play during work hours try that. And then, speculation would start about the next update, and then the video would come out, and then so on and so forth. And it really gave kind of a cadence to things, and it allowed us to kind of eat the elephant one bite at a time, because we were updating every 2 weeks, which is a little bit stressful, although not that bad, because we were kind of directing our own development. We could say how big each of those updates actually was. After a year or so of development, it came time to actually ship the thing. As I mentioned earlier, we extended for a month to make that adventure mode better, and the community was fine with that because they weren't really out anything. They had the game that they could play, and they were getting a better product in the end. Launch was very uneventful for us. We weren't crunching, right? Because the game was always kept in this shippable state the entire time through development. Every 2 weeks, we had to show it to people, so it had to be pretty good at that point. So yeah, it was the most uneventful launch I've ever seen in the industry. It was just like, oh yeah, update's up, I guess we're done, that's cool. And then we just kept on working because we promised 6 months of more content updates. It was going pretty well for us. We felt as though, the game is kind of a conglomeration of all these all these little systems and mechanics. We can just keep adding more. Partly as fan service, partly to kind of extend the tail, right? Because, the more stuff we add, like, it felt foolish to kind of throw away this kind of marketing snowball that we had with these updates. So, we shifted to a 3-week production cycle to put a week of QA in there because it was a shipped product. And you can't just say, oh, I'm sorry, I broke your save game, alpha, anymore, rightfully so. So, we slowed down a little bit and we started updating. And most of the content post-launch was actually segregated into the caves. In Don't Starve, you can go down these sinkholes and it's like a whole other set of biomes and all these other new creatures and all that. That's all the post-launch stuff. No one liked it. It felt kind of periphery, I think, and we dragged it out way too long. Like, it's like half the whole time that we spent making the whole upper world is like spent on all these cave things. And, some people like it. I kind of like it, but it really does feel like a side product. One exception to that, however, was this one update called Strange New Powers. In Strange New Powers, I wanted to address a design flaw in the original game. In the game, you get to pick who you are. Like, you're Wilson kind of by default, and then you unlock other characters of all, like, ages and sexes. And they were all very similar, unfortunately. Like, at launch, like, they had different flavor text, they look different, they sound different, but mechanically, they're kind of the same thing. And it was a point of criticism, and I think it wasn't that exciting to try as a new character. So in Strange New Powers, we actually pushed them farther apart and added another one. And people loved it. Like, this is a graph of our new forum registrations per day over from the very beginning to just the other day. And taking this as kind of a measure of community involvement, our biggest spike ever was Strange New Powers. Like, people just poured into the forums to talk about, like, oh, this character's better than this character now, and I love him because. And it was great, right? Because that was actually a really relatively cheap update to produce. Design-wise, there was a lot of thought that went into it, but like content-wise, it was just, tweaking numbers and adding a couple of effects. as opposed to like all those cave monsters we made and no one really appreciated. So, lessons learned. I think that, for me at least, this proved that the market is broader than you think. Like at the time we started, the conventional wisdom, at least in our circles, was that you had to be free to play. Gaming is dying. The consoles are dying. Online downloadable games, like if you charge for something, no one's going to come to your door. And that really scared us, and that made us kind of go down this pathway. But it's not true, right? Like we have new awesome consoles now all of a sudden, and there's more games being produced of all types right now than ever. I don't think that, I mean, free-to-play is kind of the gorilla in the room, and it brought in a whole new audience to gaming, and I think that's great, right? I don't think it's a zero-sum thing. I don't think that sucked all the oxygen out of the existing markets. If anything, the two types of gaming can learn from each other. Like we learned analytics from free-to-play. We learned rapid updates and heavy communications with the community from free-to-play. Very different from the console space. And I think we made a better game for that. So I think, like, you know, it's easy to kind of turn your nose up at free-to-play, as I often do in private. But, you know, it's not all bad. Just don't super monetize. Number two, early access, if used correctly, can actually improve your quality of life. And this was super surprising for me. Like, if you told me, yeah, you're going to be shipping the game every 2 weeks forever, I would have laughed and ran, you know, a year ago. But, you know, if you can ship the game every 2 weeks and there's small updates, and you can kind of continue them as long as you need to because you're selling the game already and people are happy and you've already, you know, turned a profit and there's no one kind of telling you to get it out by Christmas because you're just on this other weird kind of commercial space that the big boys aren't playing in, then you can actually make a game like Don't Starve with no overtime, which was awesome because I maintained that overtime or crunching is kind of a failure of either production or design. Finally, I think it's important not to be afraid of polarizing design. Don't Starve is not for everybody. That permadeath thing, people bounce, right? But I think it is a lot of what gives it its appeal. Like, it has a personality. It's not afraid to be what it is. As I said, with the market being broader, like, there's a lot of people playing games right now. There's a lot of different people who like different things playing games. So as long as you can carve out a large enough part of them to make your game for, then you're okay. You don't need to make like a watered down kind of bland game for everybody. So that's me, Kevin Forbes. That's my Twitter. We're Klei Entertainment. We're in Vancouver, Canada. Come check us out. Looks like we have like 8 minutes or so for questions, if anyone has any. Or 5 minutes. Sorry.
Hey, how's it going, Kevin?
Hi.
Hi, I'm Ryan Miller. So I wanted to ask, because you did do this rapid cycle you were telling us about, and it seems like, you know, it was a new thing. You guys are getting used to it. How did you manage the content that you created, not, you know, breaking the balance of the previous content? Like, how did you maintain your vision?
It was, the question there is, because we were cycling so rapidly and adding new content all the time, how did we make sure that new content did not break old content? I guess a two-part answer. One, it was all very loosely coupled. As I said, like, we didn't have like that really tight interplay between components that we did in like the Shank games or the Ninja games. It's a very kind of loose kind of conglomeration of a game.
Sure.
Secondly, it did break. It broke all the time, and we fixed it, right? Like, if you're going to do this, you're going to have to kind of be a bit fearless and just put stuff out there and see what happens. And, you know, I don't think we launched a single update in the history of Don't Starve without an immediate hot fix the day after, and then a hot fix for the hot fix, and then that would go for like a week. But it's good, though, because that's just your QA process. Like, you know, if you're not going to have like a giant QA soak at the end of your production, you got to amortize that over the whole thing.
So you basically were just not afraid of failure since you knew you could fix it. Sure.
Yeah, kind of.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Kevin. I'm David.
Hi.
I wonder, you talked a lot about communication with the community. Mm-hmm. Was there any idea that you took verbatim from the community that was like really good and you said, yeah?
Yeah, so the question there was, were there any ideas that we took from the community as we were talking to them over time? Lots of little ideas, like definitely for balance tweaking. Like, the community played the game and knew the game a lot better than we did in a lot of cases because we were busy making the game, and they would play it for like, ungodly numbers of hours every update. So when they told us that something was not working, it was probably not working. I remember one particular case, kind of on a whim, because that's how I roll. I changed some crafting recipes because I thought there wasn't enough grass in everything. And we pushed it live. And the community was up in arms instantly. Like, how could you do this to us? What have you done to the game? I'm like, what? Just pick more grass. But it actually turned out, in talking to them over time, my understanding of what they were doing in game was completely separate from what they were doing in game. Like, the reason they needed so much grass because they were crafting so many of this, that, and the other thing. And that is not what I intended, right? So I was like, oh, you actually are using too much grass. So we rebalanced all the costs of things and tried to address kind of the underlying issues that were causing them to build these kind of like degenerate bases that were all grass-based. But yeah, stuff like that, like, absolutely essential.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, Kevin. Over on your left.
So it's very bright lights.
I really love Don't Starve. I came to the experience in December, and it was interesting because like you had gotten over this mountain of updates, and so I like walked into this extremely enormous design with no instruction at all, as you mentioned, which is one of the game's strengths. But like I wound up getting into the game by tabbing back and forth to the wiki.
Yep.
And I was just wondering if you had any comments or thoughts about how your unique development process, where you're kind of live developing while the game's being played, like did you feel like that had an impact on the post game, like after the game is finally put to bed?
So the question there is like the game was very, very much bigger after the fact, like especially after that 6 months of updates. There was just so much stuff in there, and like you almost need a wiki to navigate it now, kind of thing. And did our open development and whatnot affect that? And I'd say yes. Don't Starve works because it is very loosely coupled, and because we can kind of pour stuff in there. So it is a game design that kind of lends itself to this iterative adding of more and more content. And yeah, like, people use the wiki. I'm okay with that. Like, if that is how you enjoy playing the game, then more power to you. As long as I don't have to write it, right? In fact, we actually use the wiki when we're checking things. It's like half the art in this thing is from the wiki, actually. It's like, I need a picture of the grass. Bloop.
I guess the question is like it felt like the training of the game was playing the game while you guys were developing it.
Yeah.
It's like, is there a takeaway there about like, well, what do you do with the game after it's enormous? But like for someone like me didn't get the advantage of learning as we went along.
Well, actually, we're making a DLC right now. So and we're using the same principles to make that DLC. There's an open or a paid beta for it, and they have updates every 2 weeks. The lead designer, or one of the big designers on that, is Bryce, who's in the audience there. And if you have any questions about it, he'll be happy to answer. but yeah, I guess the answer is you do it again. Probably time for one more.
Yeah. Hi, Kevin. I have a question about community, too. Do you guys, within the game, give cues to the players that you can join the dialogue of the communication with the community?
Yeah, definitely. The question there is, like, do we have any in-game call-outs to the community? And yeah, in the not so much once you're playing, because that's kind of the magic circle, and I don't want to violate that. But in the front menu, there's actually, when the game is in an updating state, there's this little countdown timer in the bottom left, and it's like an axe going for a pig man. And as the update gets closer, the axe gets closer, and some of the art changes, and it's kind of an advent calendar kind of thing.
Yeah, but does that give the players a cue to like join our forums?
Oh, yeah, because you can click on that, and it takes you to the forum.
It takes you to the forum.
Yeah.
Oh, great,
cool.
Thanks.
Thank you. I think there's a wrap-up room. If anybody has any other questions, we can go there. Thank you very much.